So one of the big teething problems I see a lot of hypnotherapists, and I did at one point as well, they sort of fall into, is talking way too much. Now, we're taught the more traditional and clinical type of therapy. You can call it what you want. They're all really the same thing. They're just got all fancy names for their certifications up. The way we're taught, put the client into trance, do the deepness, then give suggestions, then give visualization, then a regression, then a hug your inner child type thing. I've reframed some NLP things. That's a lot of fucking work for you as the therapist. And all of this stuff, the majority of stuff is not necessary. Here's what happens. And this is sort of the way that we view with ACH, where we teach our students. You're putting your client in a place where the unconscious mind, well, firstly, you've got to find out what the real root cause is. We've talked about this before. You find out what we call a knots. These are knots where our client's mind is all knotted up. Their thinking's all knotted up. They go around the same thought loops. They can't break in that. This becomes their pattern and their identity and stuff like this. Essentially, it's a knot inside the mind. We find out what those things are. We help collapse those things. And now you've put your client into a place where the mind can start to refile the files, put things in new places, find new emotions, new thoughts, new behaviors, all in the positive, of course. Now, what can happen when you're doing the more traditional stuff, which is give suggestions, which is not necessary. You're telling your client to have a regression. You're telling your client to go deeper and telling your client a lot of things. You can disrupt the unconscious mind doing what it knows best, which is healing. If you get to watch any of the demos, guys, in our ACH training on this YouTube channel, you'll see a lot of the times the student sitting there, one of the students is the therapist, one is the client. And that student sits there a lot of the time just being silent while the client is in trance. And this is on purpose. I think a lot of us get caught in, okay, my client's in trance. Now it's time to give them all the suggestions and tell them what to do. Absolutely not. Realize that your client's mind is way more intelligent than you. It knows what to do. All you have to do is put it in a place where it can have this new unconscious thinking without the conscious mind interfering. Every time you talk as the therapist, you talk too much, you give too many suggestions, you read too much of your script, you tell too many stories, you will interrupt this. I like to think of this as like you put the cake in the oven and you let the cake start to bake inside the oven. So what you're doing is putting the client's mind in the oven, then let it bake. I spend a lot of my time with the thousands of lawyers I work with sitting in absolute silence. And all I'm giving them every now and then, instead of like a suggestion or a story or something like that, we give them something called process instruction. Now, I won't get into this. It's quite an advanced Ericksonian thing, but it's basically telling the client to keep doing what they're doing in a very vague sense. Now, a lot of the times, every time I would talk too much with my lawyers or even my students, they would snap out of trance because I'm asking them to do too much conscious activity. When I let them go, let them sit in silence, I had clients sitting in that silence for well over 45 minutes, but I can see the processing going on. The eyes are fluttering. I see them smile. I see the emotion. You can see the cogs in their head starting to turn. When you see these things, guys, for lack of better words, shut the fuck up. You don't need suggestions. You do not need a story. Anything you can come up with as a therapist is not going to be nearly as impactful as what's happening inside of their head, and they will do it themselves. I see a lot of people say, I help create the space for my client to have a transformation. You absolutely do, and that's awesome. But then you go ahead and you interrupt that process. It's pure unconscious processing. You interrupt it by talking too much, telling a client what to do, telling a client what to see. And not only is this exhausting for you as a therapist, but you're interrupting their ability to do it for themselves. Always realize this. If I'm working with a lawyer that's 40 or 45 years old and they want to quit smoking, they've got a lifetime of experience, all these different conclusions and knots, how the hell would I even know how to navigate all of that? How would I know what they need to hear, what suggestion they need? I'm just guessing and I'm telling them what I want them to have. And this is a very bad place for us as therapists. I see this all the time. This thing, I've got to give fucking suggestions. I've got to tell them to find a scene. I've got to tell them to have a visualization. No, you don't. What's crazy is your client will have those things organically, but every time you talk, you interrupt those things. I've been sitting there, and you can see this with our students in the demos as well, where I'll be saying nothing, or the student will be saying nothing. The client's in trance, going through all this processing, all this cool hypnotic stuff's happening. Then the student comes out and we say, how was that? What did you experience? What's happening right now? And they say, oh my God, I saw these colors and this visualization. I regressed back to I was 2 years old. I was having a chat with my father who passed away 15 years ago. But us as the therapists are sitting there going, cool. And we didn't have to tell them to do that stuff. You can wait for regressions to happen organically. You can wait for those visualizations to happen organically. You can wait for the right suggestion that your client will come up with organically for themselves if you learn how to shut up more. Again, if you watch any Erickson stuff, and I'm a big fan of Erickson, a lot of the time he was just silent. He didn't say a word. His client would just sit in trance for hours upon hours. Sure, there are other sessions where he might tell a story, he might have a language pattern, but that's suited for that context. It doesn't need to be dragged into every single client. The best therapy you can do is take that client to the place where there's no more knots, there's no more conclusions, and let them sit in there. Let them sit in the oven, let them bake, wait till they come out, get some feedback and see what's happening from that. So I know, guys, and you can see this in the demos, and I make jokes about this all the time. There are little transformations that we have during our ACH training where there's the client who's one of the students and the therapist who's another student as well, where the student therapist says like 10 words. The other student goes into real trance, has a real transformation, real unconscious moments, real this, that, and the other, comes out and says, wow, like I can't even explain what just happened. And the student therapist sitting there going, I didn't have to do anything. Like, Scott, how does that work? I didn't have to say anything. I didn't have to tell a story. I didn't have to do visualization. Why? Because, guys, those things happen organically. Okay, you don't have to force them. You just have to be very, very patient for you as the therapist to wait to those things. And that's what I'm a big advocate of. And something I was taught by my mentor as well is be very, very patient. I never told a client to go into regression, but I had them, as in my clients had them. I never told a client to see their dead father they haven't spoken to in 25 years, but that happened. I never told them to have this experience, this sensation, this, and this, but it happened. I didn't have to say anything. I just took them to a place and allowed those things to happen organically, guys. So be very, very aware. You can overtalk, like overcooking the egg. You can oversell. You can give too many things away to your client, and eventually your client's conscious mind's going to snap in and go, hey, this is not my suggestions. These are your suggestions. This is what you want me to do, and I don't like being told what to do. And it also happens at an unconscious level as well. We're always told the unconscious mind will just listen to what you have to say and your suggestions. It's fictitious. If you think the conscious mind doesn't like to be told what to do, all it takes is for the unconscious mind to say, hey, that's not my suggestion. I'm not going to listen to that. Don't tell me what to do. Or it says something like, okay, if you think you know it all, Scott, you go ahead and solve this problem because you keep interrupting me and I know what to do because I'm the unconscious mind, but you think you know it all. You go ahead and fix it and I'm going to make it really, really hard for you. You've got to be aware of these things, okay? So what I'd rather do is get a client to the unconscious space, say, okay, unconscious mind, it's all yours. You go do it. I'll help you look after the safety of this person. If you want to give them a visualization, you do it. If you want to give them a suggestion, you do it. If you want to give them a regression with a hug your inner child type thing, you do it. I'm just going to sit back and make sure my client's safe. When you can create that relationship for you as a therapist, but also your client, you'll see massive dividends in your transformations and you won't have to do as much. There's no need to prep. You can't script that stuff, but also it doesn't allow you to be so exhausted at the end. I mean, could you imagine reading like a 2.5-hour script? I'd be exhausted. I'm shocking at talking out loud and reading from a piece of paper out loud, and my sessions wouldn't go anywhere. But it also violates all those rules of, don't tell your clients what to do. Don't talk too much. Take your client to a place where they're in that unconscious space. Let them have that place. Let them sit in silence. Know they're going to bake inside the oven. Wait till they come out, get some feedback, and then assess what you need to do next, okay? So stop talking so much, guys. Spend more time in silence and know that their unconscious mind is way more intelligent than you. Stop telling it what to do.